This slide shows about the life and impact of Francesco Petrarca. He's better known as Petrarch. Petrarch was an Italian humanist, writer, and a poet who greatly influenced the Italian Renaissance. He was born in 1304 in Arezzo, Italy. And Arezzo is a very significant town, and it's something that he would be surrounded by a lot. Not Arezzo itself, but the content of it. Arezzo at this point had been around for about 1,000 years. It was around during Augustan Rome, at which point it was one of the largest cities. It's filled with Roman architecture, as you can see from this Santa Maria della Pieve here. There's these swooping Roman arches, the square clock tower, the sort of circular, cylindrical architecture here. Beyond that, there's just historiography all over the place. There's plaques, there's monuments, things written in Latin from ancient Rome, which talk about battles that took place here and trading and all this stuff. And he would be exposed to this kind of stuff throughout his whole childhood. He was born in Arezzo, didn't spend much time there, but most of his childhood was spent in Incisa, which is a village right outside of Florence. And then from there, he would move to Pisa. He spent 7 years in Incisa and then moved to Pisa to start his education. So the very early years of his life were surrounded by this kind of architecture and this history and all these reminders of a classical period that's gone now, and which, kind of like Charlemagne, it's so far ahead of what they have at this time. And it's very, very likely that this exposure ingrained his humanist ideals and his preference for antiquity and almost a sense of superiority of the past. He was educated in Pisa from 1311 to 1316, Montpellier from 1316 to 1320. At that point, his family had moved to Avignon, so he was attending school in France. But shortly after that, he traveled to Bologna, and he was there for 1320 to 1326. This is the University of Bologna, where he would have been studying. At the request of his father, he was studying law. At this time, law was a career that paid very well. It had a lot of social influence that accompanied it. It's just a promising career path, especially if you're able to get into one of these universities. If you're lucky enough to have the privileges that Petrarch does. However, Petrarch is far more interested in classical literature. He's already writing poems at this time, and he's also spending his time looking for manuscripts, purchasing manuscripts. Since he's living on his own in Italy and his family's in France, it's very likely that his father or someone is sending him money, allowance money, essentially. And he's spending a lot of it on these manuscripts, things like Cicero and St. Augustus. So seeing this, his father believes that his son is being curbed from his education. He's not taking it seriously. He's not paying attention to it. So in 1325, his father burns a lot of these manuscripts that he buys. Ironically, this probably pushed Petrarch even further down his humanism, maybe out of resentment, maybe out of just he wants to continue this now. And also his education probably deepened this as well. You have to remember he's studying at the University of Bologna. He's studying at a law school. So he's probably going to be reading ancient Roman orators. He's going to be reading stuff like Cicero. He's going to be reading things that he's already interested in anyway. In 1326, his father died, so he returns to Avignon. Since he was the eldest male heir, it's very likely that he had possession of the house at this time. This is his house in Avignon, and it's a modern museum now. And this portrait right here is housed in his house. At this point, he was able to pursue his literature how he wants. There's no pressure coming from his family, and he's an adult. He's able to do things he wasn't able to do while he was locked down in university. He can travel. He can travel around Europe. It's at this point that he meets Laura Denoves, who is influential to his writing. His most significant works revolve around Laura and his love for this woman. It's said that he met her on Good Friday in 1327 in Avignon. The writing that he has for Laura has a very chivalric tone. A lot of historians think that Laura, the real Laura, was a woman named Laura Denoves, married to Hugh de Sade. She had 10 children. So given her marital status, Petrarch did not have, he knew that he wasn't going to be able to have her. So his love, once again, has this chivalric tone of he admires her beauty, he admires her from afar, and not so much out of lust, but just for who she is and her beauty. But he knows that nothing's ever going to happen. And there's actually, in some of his texts, like the Secretum Meum, which we'll discuss a little more, he talks about how they have a confrontation, and he has to come to terms with the fact that this love is unrequited. So around this time, the 1330s to the 1340s, he just continues his search for manuscripts. This isn't one of the manuscripts that he found, but this is the kind of thing that he would be discovering. This is one of Cicero's manuscripts. Cicero was something that he greatly enjoyed. This is housed in the St. Andrews University in Scotland. To supplement this, he started working for a French cardinal named Giovanni Colonna. The cardinal is somebody who probably has connections. He's a cardinal, so he's already connected to the Roman papacy. And with these connections, he's able to help Petrarch a lot. He probably helps him to find these manuscripts through those connections. Of course, working for the clergy, Petrarch swore an oath of celibacy, but there is evidence that he had children. One of which is his son, who one of the sources says that he talks about very tenderly. But even more evidence is shown for his daughter. Some people say that her name is Tullia, named after a Cicero character who Petrarch really loved. In others, she's named Francesca. This could be because her husband was named Francesco, or of course her father. There could be some connection there. The way historians know that Francesca or Tullia existed is because Petrarch names her husband in his will. He names her husband as his heir. At this time, while he's studying, he actually manages to find a lot of stuff. He's searching not just for manuscripts, but ones that have supposedly been lost to time. And this is probably where Giovanni comes in, giving him the information about this kind of stuff. But he found Cicero's orations in Liege. He traveled all around France, the Low Countries, Germany, Belgium. And while this is something that he did a lot between the 1330s and 1340s, it's something that would continue into his life. It's around this time, when he's working for Giovanni, that he starts writing his Historia Africa. This is a reprint of Africa from the 1570s. Africa is a story about General Scipio Africanus during the Second Punic War. This is around the 230s. And it was written all in Latin. This was a really big deal for Petrarch. It gained notoriety amongst the clergy, amongst Colonna and all his friends. They shared it. So he got a lot of recognition in France, and this recognition even reached Rome. He was invited to Rome to be crowned the Pope Laureate. And this itself is really significant for Petrarch, because it's not just a recognition of his work, it's also a reminder of antiquity. To him, his work is responsible for a revival of classic Rome. He's the first person to receive the title of Pope Laureate in centuries. So it's not just that he's getting this cool honorary title, he is reviving an old system, which is how he sees it. Now, his adherence to Latin and his insistence on Latin is one of the major things people write about him. And it's something that is no surprise given that he's a humanist. He loves orators like Cicero. Now, this love conflicted with his religious devotion. He writes in the Secretum Meum that he's having trouble balancing his love for a bygone era, his unrequited love for Lara, with his devotion to religion. And a lot of people call the Secretum Meum the best way to examine Petrarch's mind, to examine who he was and what he thought. In this book, he's talking with St. Augustine, who was another big influence of him. And a lot of it discusses his love for Lara. His most famous work is Il Canzoniere, which is a collection of poems and sonnets and songs, dances, all these things that he wrote for Lara. And it's very eloquent. What's surprising about this is that even though he's known for writing in Latin, this was all written in common Italian. And it's over 300 works. It's things that he's been working on for his entire life after meeting Lara. And you can also see where some of this conflict comes in here, because he separates his book between 1348, where Lara died. So it's 1348 before death, after death. So he's treating this the way that historians treat the birth of Christ and the era of Christ. He's equating this woman to Christ on some level. So it's easy to see how he would be conflicted with his feelings for Lara and his religious devotion. Beyond this, he was just a great writer. He was friends with a lot of poets, one of which was Boccaccio. He wrote letters to Boccaccio. And he also enjoyed hiking. A lot of his time looking for manuscripts was spent climbing up mountains, climbing to the tops of mountains where monasteries were located. He has an entire book about climbing Mount Venot in France and searching for one of these monasteries. But what he's most well known for is how he used Latin, not just in a way that made sense. He wasn't just translating a dead language. He was using it in a way that was easy to read, almost romanticized, and encouraged people to read it more. Aside from this, he also wrote books about life. He dabbled in philosophy a little bit. He talked about living under religion. He has a book called De Vita Solidaria. And of course, he translated a lot of manuscripts into Latin. It wasn't just that he was writing original works in Latin, he was translating forgotten texts. He also had a journal on gardening. He died in 1374 on his birthday near Padua, Italy. He was found by one of his friends face down in a book. Now, at the time, a lot of his work may not have been as significant or as influential as one may think, but after his death during the Renaissance is when a lot of his writings get re-examined and influence how the Renaissance plays out. Petrarch is an influential figure, and a lot of people say that without him, the Renaissance would never have happened. So, yeah, that's it.